We're in a series right now called Q&A, looking at some of life's most difficult questions, some of the questions that Jesus asked. And we're going to be in John chapter 5. So if you got a Bible, maybe a smartphone, we're going to be in John chapter 5 this morning. Some of life's most difficult questions, like, where do you want to go eat? Train wreck of a question, isn't it? Yeah, right. If you're married, it's like, I heard this guy said, fella, this is a little piece of relationship advice for the fellas. If you want to take your wife out to dinner, what you do is you tell her, hey, get ready. We're getting ready to go out for a special dinner date. And when she gets all ready, you ask her, where do you think we're going? And she'll say, Arby's. If she's real fancy, I mean. And whatever she says, you just go, yeah, that's exactly where we're going. That way you don't have to ask, like, where you want to go. You just go, where do you think we're going? Then you look real smart. Fellas, you are welcome. Let me ask you this. You ever had the wind knocked out of you? That is one of life's scariest and worst feelings ever, right? When I was a kid, down at the old Bellevue School in Orange, we had this, the kids, we hung up a tire swing, and every time somebody would get on that, it'd be about 30 of us, and we'd see if we could swing that person over top of the limb, I mean, this thing was probably 25 foot long, and we'd see how far, the goal was if we could swing somebody around the whole limb, you know what I mean? It never happened, but that was the goal, And I got on that thing one day, and everybody tried to do that to me, throw me over there. But what we failed to look into, it wasn't real OSHA-approved process. We failed to test the rope to be big boy rated. And so when I got right there at the pinnacle, I was 3 foot from Jesus. And when I got there, the rope let go. It broke right in half, and I hit on the pavement like this on my back, and immediately had all the wind knocked out of me, right? And the fit like that. Why is it when you get the wind, you can't suck no air in? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? You just stuck there like. Right? So this perplexed me. So I did some online research, medical investigation about how this whole process works. And I want to read you this small section from kidshealth.org, because that was the most medical research journal I could understand. It said most of the time when you breathe in and out, you don't give it a thought, but if you ever gotten the wind knocked out of you, you know that breathing can get interrupted. Getting hit in the belly or falling hard on your back can make you feel like you can't breathe for a little bit. It's called getting the wind knocked out of you, but it turns out it's not the air or wind that's the problem. I don't know who did this research, but that's my problem. It says it's your diaphragm. The diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscle under your lungs. When you inhale, the diaphragm pulls down to help pull air into the lungs. When you exhale, the diaphragm pushes up to help push air out of the lungs. Getting hit in the stomach or back can cause a spasm in your diaphragm. That means the muscle contracts or gets tense instead of doing what it normally does to help you breathe. Christian, is that right? Listen, here's the deal. $45,000 and 4 years, 2 weeks away from graduation as a nurse, registered nurse, and I can't get a simple medical question answered. That's, should have just tossed it out on South Boston Road. Right, if he's waiting on you, you know exactly what's going on. Whether it's a major medical event like getting the wind knocked out of you or any type of sickness, right? We've all been through some type of sickness or illness, and my, oh my, have we not heard a lot about sickness and illness over the past 13 months, right? No matter what it is, we've all been through this process where we've been injured or sick, and the natural process is, you know, we get sick, maybe we go to the doctor, maybe we go to the drugstore. We look around for things to help us to feel better, right? Let me ask you this. Better patient, wife or husband?
Wife. 100%.
We got one wife and a reluctant husband. Fellas, well, let's just be honest. We're terrible patients, aren't we? No matter who we are, at some point in life, we're going to face illness. And when we face illnesses, we go to the doctor, we look at all the symptoms, we try to diagnose exactly what's going on to find the right medication to help us. And we pick up this story in John chapter 5, where we run into the great physician who comes across someone who's sick. And I think what we're going to discover this morning is that Jesus is going to do so much more than just treat the symptoms of an illness. He's going to provide a true cure for the illness in itself. That was his whole goal in life. You know, earlier you read from Matthew chapter 22, and I just want to challenge you to kind of remind you why we do that. We're doing that this year to help us grow in spiritual knowledge and try to retain some of Scripture and memorize it. And so those are not just fun verses we put on the screen, but we really want to challenge you through each series to memorize what those verses are so that we can be better disciples. Matthew chapter 22 said, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second's like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now flip over to John chapter 5. I'm going to start in verse 1. I think the first thing we got to do is we got to look at this illness that we come across. John chapter 5, starting verse 1. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethsaida, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he learned that he had been in this condition for a long time. Now, I want to take just a few moments to give us the biblical context of what is happening in the context of right then and right there as this occurs with Jesus and this fella, and then we'll transition that into what that context looks like for you and I. He says sometime later, you see, Jesus had already been out on the ministry circuit. He's been out visiting from town to town. This is going to be the second time that Jesus has made his way back into Jerusalem. And there's this sheep gate. Let me tell you just kind of what this looks like. Here in the temple, the temple's a huge structure, right? And usually in the north wall of the temple, there's this gate. And so what happens is people come to the temple to offer sacrifices and worship and all that type of thing. And so what happens is that they will bring all those animals into that gate in the north wall, and there's a pool there. And so what they're doing is they want to make sure that they clean all the animals before they make their way into the temple where they'll be sacrificed. And you say, well, what's the big purpose behind all this? If you remember, being clean or unclean is a huge deal to the Jewish people, isn't it? So if they want to do everything possible to make sure that they stay clean, because if they become unclean, we read through the Old Testament, there's this whole process of sacrifices they got to make. There's time periods on how long they got to wait, and then they got to go back to the priest to be declared clean again. Without that happening, they cannot interact with people in society and all those types of things. So they want to do everything in their power to not become unclean, because they want to be able to socialize in society. They want to be able to come to the temple and worship and do all those things that have to happen. Now, this word Bethsaida is literally translated house of mercy. And what happens here is there are all these different people, the lame, the disabled, invalids, paralyzed, all that type of thing, right? And so what they do is they'll lay around that pool. Now, what's believed to happen is all of these people believe that at some point, an angel will swoop down from heaven. And if you've ever seen pictures of an airplane going over water, and the water, then what happens after that? It's a question and answer sermon series. Like when that plane flies over, the water what? It stirs it up, right? One of the greatest pictures I've seen of that is if you've ever been to, anybody ever been to St. Martin and held onto the fence as airplanes come into St. Martin Airport? So it's so low that it will blow people back off of the fence. That's how close it's got to come, right? But that's this picture that these people have, is that an angel is going to swoop down from heaven, and when he does, the angel will be so close to the pool that it will stir up the water. And what they believe is that if the first person in the water will be healed, right? And so we've got all of these disabled people, paralyzed, lame, invalid, you name it. They're sitting by the pool just waiting for an angel to come from heaven, swoop down so close, the water stirs up, and then there'll be whoever's the first one in there, they're healed. Now, let me just tell you that that's probably superstitious. There's no proof that ever happened. There's not biblical text that says, God would send angels down by the pool of Bethsaida and it would heal people. That's not true. Probably more than likely what happened is that every once in a while the spring underneath the pool would gush and the water would move and people would race to get in the water hoping that they would be healed. Now, while that's neither here nor there, it is interesting to some place. I think the most interesting fact is that the rest of the world's population, unless you are disabled, lame, paralyzed, invalid, unless that's your issue, the rest of the world's population is avoiding this place at all cost, except one person, and his name is Jesus. That's exactly where Jesus goes to hang out. I think the other biblical context that we need to have is this guy has been an invalid for 38 years, which is an extremely long time, isn't it? Yes? Yeah? The older you get, 38 years is much longer. It's older. It gets older as you go. But I think what's interesting is that if we look back, the average life expectancy when this story occurs is about 40. So not only has this guy had this problem for the last 38 years, Basically, what Scripture is recording is that this is a lifelong incident for this gentleman. And not only is it been for the last 38 years, but he's drawing near to the close of his life. I think what's so unique in our context now for today is that not only does Jesus knows this man's condition, but Jesus knows my condition as well. He knows your condition. Maybe you're dealing with the pain of loss. Maybe right now your work is terrible. Maybe your finances are terrible. Maybe you're dealing with guilt. Maybe your relationship with your spouse is on the rocks. Maybe just relationships for you in general are not going real well. Maybe you're dealing with shame. Folks, those are all symptoms to a much greater illness. And while some of these things often happen to us, I think more often than not, they're brought on by us. Let's take just a minute and look at the response that we get here from this gentleman. John chapter 5, verse 7. Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Now I think this is a little bit funny, but it's not funny. I think he's got a legitimate point when Jesus looks at him and says, Jesus got this compassion for this guy. And the guy goes, man, I don't have anybody help me get in there, like everybody beats me to the water, like imagine that. Everybody beats the invalid guy to the water. Like how fast is he really going to be getting there? And he just goes, man, I don't have anybody to help me. Well, I think part of his response is legitimate, right? Like that makes sense to us. I think maybe the other part of his response is not so legitimate, like, poor pitiful me. I just got nobody to help me get in the water. Don't we do that sometimes with our illness as well? Like I don't want to change. I don't want to read my Bible anymore. I'm tired of prayer. I just don't have time. I work all day and I come home. I fall asleep when I read the Bible. Excuse after excuse about why our relationships are in shambles, our finances are terrible, and why we are addicted to whatever. Folks, the grass is not greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it. Courtney and I moved from the lake. We lived in the lake. We had this quarter-acre lot that had about 36,000 trees on it. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. And we couldn't grow grass, and so when we bought this new home, I said, look, we are going to have one of those Scott's lawn, like that lawn you see on TV, that's going to be my grass. It's going to be lush and fluff. It's going to be amazing. So we moved in. I got a huge load of compost delivered, and the boys spread it over the whole yard, and our neighbors hated us for days while it stank. And then we put grass down, and we planted it, and then when it came up, we began to put lime on it and weed and feed. We aerate it. We overseed it. I'm going to tell you right now, I got a Scott's lawn, but it's created by Chris. Virginia Green ain't seen me yet. Now I'm that guy in the neighborhood like, get off the grass. And Cullen knows it. And he's still just small enough to spank. He knows exactly where the sidewalk is, but every time he cuts right across the grass just to wear me out. But man, that's true about our spiritual lives as well. If we want our spiritual lives to flourish and we want to be productive and grow in who Jesus is, it's going to take hard work. It's going to take effort. Like, you're not just going to sprout up this spiritual being. You want to be who God created you to be. You want to be a better disciple of Jesus. It's going to take time and effort, where we put time into Bible study. We spend time into prayer. We spend time just listening to God speak to us through his word. We're going to take time it's going to take time to make commitments to be at church and at small group and you name it. Like, all those things take work. It's not just going to happen. We're going to have to put some effort in. It's going to cost us. And finally, that leads Jesus to not only ask this guy one of the most important questions in Scripture, but I think that if we listen close and read John chapter 5, verse 6, we hear God whispering to us this same question. When Jesus saw him lying there and he learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Do you want to get well? When we complain to God about our circumstances, and we give him excuse after excuse of why we're in the same place spiritually and emotionally year after year, perhaps that same question Jesus aims at my heart and at your heart. Do you want to get well? Do you want to move forward spiritually? Do you want to make progress emotionally? Do you want to go to new places you've never been before with God? You don't have to let your situation define you. Our praise team is going to come back up, and here in just a moment we're going to stand and sing together about all the goodness that God, all the bad that God can overcome. Because I think if we truly answer the question, do you want to get well? If we answer that question with, yes, Lord, I want to get well, I think Jesus then responds to us, John chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. Then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. I think the truth of the matter is, we all find ourselves in the midst of an illness. And that illness is called sin. All those other things, those broken relationships and pain and hurt, all of those things are just symptoms to the overlying problem that we all got, called sin. And Jesus came and went to the cross and bled to provide a cure for that illness. Jesus was buried in a tomb and raised from the dead on the third day to prove to us once and for all that he had conquered death. Because unfortunately, while we believe that COVID and all those things are bad and maybe life-threatening, I promise you, I guarantee you, the result in your sickness, sin, will be death. Not might be, but it will cause death. but there's a cure, and his name is Jesus. The question is, do you want to get well?